What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video. You know, another week goes by, another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh tournament wraps up, and that's what we're here to discuss today. Over this past weekend, the Imperial Format tournament, the actually first of its kind in the Imperial Format Discord server, so it's called the SPQR1, because, you know, going with the whole Imperial Rome theme, you know, all that stuff. But that wrapped up, and it was a pretty exciting tournament, and I'm excited to see where the meta shifts from here, because I do think there were some interesting things to discuss with the decks that managed to top. Now, if you look at the deck type representation here, you might not be too excited about, you know, things to come. Because if you see here, there are 16 tomato control decks that were brought, and then one relinquished deck, one flip control deck that were brought as well. So that may seem like, you know, Imperial is just a tier 0 format, and to be fair, it very well could be. You know, this is back in February 2003 when, you know, good stuff decks are very, very good, and the good stuff deck in this format is called Tomato Control in general. And it's just very powerful. You know, you've got Sangans and Witches to bring out off the tomatoes. You've got Jinzo to bring out and shut down your opponent's traps and get really aggressive. You've got Io to shut down their spells. So a lot of janker decks, you know, have a tough time competing there. But I do think that, you know, there is some experimentation that can be done there. But it does make sense to me that in this tournament, these sort of inaugural, you know, specific Imperial tournaments going on, that we would see people bring tomato control. Because I do think the good stuff deck in this time is sort of not quite solidified, right? Like if you look at Android format, there is some experimentation being done with certain ratios and stuff like that. But I do feel like on the whole, you know, people have the core down pretty well in Android format. I don't think that same core has been nailed down quite as much here. And, you know, you see people experimenting with different things here. So I'm excited to dive into the topping deck list and really discuss, you know, what new techs people are trying to bring into it, trying to experiment with, and see how that actually worked out for them. So I'm not really going to spend too much more time on this screen because, you know, again, it was 16 people bringing tomato control here in an 18-person tournament. Now, for the deck category representation, you know, the two control decks, I assume, are just the relinquish and flip control decks, and then the rest is mid-range. And I do think this format is a very mid-range format, you know. You do have control aspects, you know, grind aspects and stuff with like tomatoes, the Sangans, the Witches, but a lot of it does just come down to who can actually set up their aggressive position first and just, you know, steamroll the opponent. And you saw that in the final stream, if you watched that on PJ Darkness's channel. They streamed the finals of the event, and, you know, that was over in like 15 minutes because one of the duelists was able to just set up an aggressive presence with Jinzo and things like that very early and just, you know, basically steamroll the opponent. And sometimes you got to get aggressive in this format. And that's something that people need to sort of experiment with and test out. And when you dive into this format, you do have to sort of tinker with your play style to actually fit it to the format. And that applies to pretty much any format that you can play. But let's dive into the top decks. Before we dive into the list themselves, subscribe to the channel if you like this sort of content, or if you want to see me playing in these sorts of formats in the future. I released gameplay videos mostly, but, you know, I also have older videos featuring Imperial format specifically on the channel as well. So let's dive into the topping deck list now. The third place list we got here is from GMYFS, and, you know, this is a pretty standard list overall. You know, you've got the triple tomatoes, you've got the can soldier that you can go into, but you've also got the double Sangan and Witch. You get Jinzo here, of course, triple Moth, triple Chaser, which is the biggest beater on a level 4 that doesn't have a drawback. So, like, you know, Jiragumo and Dark Elf, they do exist, but they have drawbacks to them. And you've got this 2K defender in the form of Giant Soldier of Stone. You've also got a Manual Bug here as well. Something interesting about this deck is that they are playing Cyberjar and Morphing Jar. These are definitely not necessarily standard inclusions in a lot of these decks, but GeoMyVS is known as a jar enthusiast, so it makes sense why they'd include them here. But these are very interesting cards to include. They can be very swingy. They can swing the game in your opponent's favor if you get unlucky. But oftentimes, if you're using these well, you can maneuver them so that way they're more likely to pay off in your favor. Some other interesting things to note here: only one trap hole, not playing multiples. I mean, there are two others in the side deck here, but not playing 3 is a bit interesting because trap hole is very good against Tomato. But if you think about it, like, you know, Tomato's really and Mechanical Chaser. Tomato and Chaser are the two things that it's good against. But I don't really think, you know, it's good on like when they're established on board. And so maybe that's why they chose to cut down on it. Maybe it's just space considerations. Fisher is generally better than Trap Hole because Fisher, while it does lose you life points in the short term, it can also, you know, just deal with them even if you draw it in a top deck mode. So I do think that makes sense. Double Knock also makes sense here. Flip Monster very powerful this format. And Dust Tornado also makes sense. This may seem a bit weird, but Dust Tornado is very good to stop IO there. So it makes a lot of sense why the Dust Tornado would be here. So pretty standard list. I think if you're looking for a good list to start out with in this format, this one is very serviceable. Of course, if you want to spice things up a little bit more, we've got Danny Droid's list here, which is playing a very interesting set of 3 Giant Germs. This is a very good card that you can go into off Tomato, deck thins for you, deals damage to your opponent as well. So that's very nice. I like that inclusion here. I think it's a very neat one. And, you know, just thinning out your deck is very powerful in a format where you're trying to get into your really good cards as quickly as possible. So it makes a lot of sense why they would play that. Also, Banisher of the Light is in here instead of Giant Soldier of Stone. I do indeed like this tech. I think Banisher is generally more powerful than Giant Soldier of Stone because you can, you know, commit it to field. If your opponent attacks into it, they do take some damage likely. And also, now they're in an awkward spot where if they've committed a Sanguine or Witch to field, that's a lot less good now. And so that can cut off their resource engine pretty well. In a deck like this, where you're playing the Giant Germs and the Tomatoes, it can be a bit awkward, but, you know, you've got to remember, when you have a card like this, you can choose when to commit it to field. So, you know, you can potentially play around with that a little bit. And also, you know, they're also on the 1 trap hole as opposed to playing multiple trap holes. So again, very interesting thing, but it does make sense, you know, prioritizing Fisher over the trap holes. Fisher also deals with Jinzo too, which trap hole does not deal with, and Jinzo is a house in this format. So very, very cool to see more experimentation going on here with the layout of this deck, what exactly you're trying to tomato into. I think that that's really cool. And hopefully we see more experimentation with this sort of idea in the future. Lastly, we've got the winning deck list here from Lalo8888. And, you know, this is very, very cool. You know, you see elements of both GMYFS and Danny Droid's decks in here. You see the Banisher of the Light from Danny Droid's deck, and you see the Cyberjar from GMYFS's deck. And you see that Lalo chose to play both of them because they are very, very powerful. No Morphing Jar here, though, which does, I think, make sense because Cyberjar is removal as well as draw, whereas Morphing Jar is just draw. So if you are in a sort of position where you're behind and you want to commit something to field, Morphing Jar is a bit less impactful than Cyberjar. So I think that makes sense. Another interesting thing to note here is only 1 time seal. Or not only 1 time seal. Most people don't even play 1 time seal. So this 1 inclusion time seal is very interesting here. I'm not sure if they want to, you know, keep that in the future, but it can be very strong when it goes off. It's basically, it's kind of trading 1 for 1 in a weird way because you're depriving your opponent of a card for a turn. And so that's kind of nice. And if you're in a position where you've sort of like gotten your field presence set up, then time seal can be very devastating if your opponent is desperately wanting to draw an out to that. Also, double trap hole here instead of just 1. So that's kind of interesting. A lot of the other decks were playing 1, but I do think this makes sense. I mean, trap hole stopping the Tomatoes or the Mechanical Chasers can be very good. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious to see if people continue to explore this format, whether trap hole will increase in usage or decrease in usage. And also to see where like Fisher compares to it. You know, double Fisher here as well. Again, Fisher, a very, very good card in this format, so it does make a lot of sense there. So I like this list a lot. I think if you're looking for a starting list, this is probably the best starting list that you can go for because it is, you know, I think the, maybe not the most optimized because I don't think any list is like truly optimized at this point. But, you know, it did win a tournament. Lala went actually undefeated. So, you know, it was double elimination and they made it to winners finals on the winner's side. So they never actually lost a match with this deck. So, you know, it definitely has been tested out to a fair degree. But keep in mind, this was an 18-person tournament. So in order to fully understand, you know, what the best sort of optimized good stuff deck looks like for this format, more testing will be needed. And that's why I'm so excited to see what people come up with for the next tournament. Also, I think once a sort of good stuff deck really gets nailed down, I think that will then open the way for experimenting with other decks like Relinquish or Flip Controller, things like that. I do think that some of those decks can be good in this format, but, you know, given the results of this tournament, I think that we probably will be calling this a tier 0 format right now with the tomato control stuff. But again, that can always change as more tournaments happen and more decks are discovered or tinkered with. So if you want to sort of break into the metagame with a different deck that's not on anyone's radar, definitely head on over to the Imperial Discord server, linked in the description down below, and, you know, test your hand out at the next tournament. It should be a lot of fun, and I hope that you join if you're interested in it. Also, if you want to play games in Imperial format or any other format that I've featured on the channel, definitely head on over to the YGO from Zero Discord server, linked in the description as well. We also hold our own monthly tournaments, but not necessarily in Imperial format specifically, but just in whatever format we've got that month. But that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed as always. Let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are on the Imperial metagame. How do you think it will shift after this? Do you think there are any tech cards that will see more play next tournament? Maybe some that will see less play as well. I always look forward to discussing with you, and I'm always excited to talk about where these formats might go. Also, if you want to support me directly, I have a Patreon linked in the description down below as well. And if you join the Patreon, get shouted in the videos. So big shoutouts to GMYFS, Rinswin, Porkchop Coon, Bread Donker, Dump Truck, and Tyler Compton. It means a lot that you all support me this way and encourage me to make more videos like this in the future. That's going to do it for me. I hope that you all enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGR from Zero, and I'm signing off.